Hello, everybody. I'm back. Dr. K.K. Agarwal, President, Heart Care Foundation of India. Welcome to our show, daily 7 p.m. Med Talks with Dr. K.K. Agarwal to provide you everything about COVID and also share experiences of people who have dealt with Corona themselves. Let's have the headlines today. COVID-19 Law Lab has been launched by UN agencies. It is considered an important tool for sharing laws and policies. Many countries will participate so that we can come back with a common legal situation all over the world. India witnesses record recoveries in a single day. More than 63% patients have been recovered so far. Ultimately, it will be 99%. The zero surveillance of Delhi shows that the mortality is less than 1%. COVID-19 vaccine in India likely to be by the year end. And already government have started thinking once it is available, how it is going to be distributed to the people. The first Indian-made antigen test kit receives approval by ICMR. As the time goes by, we will have large number of kits indigenous, which will be very, very cheap. And a time is going to come when we will have a antigen test like a pregnancy test. At home, do your test and stay at home for a home isolation. Delhi government plans to conduct a monthly serological survey. That means their data of 22.8% zero prevalence will be rechecked every month so that we know the exact picture. The first zero surveillance was in the containment zone and it did not cater to the children. Therefore, the rate of positivity of antibodies will be much higher than 22.8%. Let's now go for the topic of the day. Uniform COVID policies in the country is the topic of the day. Today, even in Delhi and Noida, you may find that the policies are different. Do we need uniform policies? And lots of other legal questions we have. But before we discuss legal problems, we always discuss a success story. Let me introduce my panelists today. I have with me respectable Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, a senior third-term member of parliament, eminent jurist, former chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice, a former ASG and senior national spokesman, National Congress. Welcome to our show, Dr. Abhishek Singhvi. And I have with me Dr. Professor Shashank Joshi, Padma Shri awardee. He is on the chair, International Diabetic Federation, Southeast Asia. He is the Dean of Indian College of Physicians. He is an endocrinologist par excellence, and he is attached to hospitals like Leelavati, Apollo Sugar Clinic, and Bhatia Hospital, apart from his own setup called a Joshi Clinic. So coming back to our discussions on the subject, but before we discuss any aspect of my rights, let's first listen from the horse's mouth. Dr. Abhishek Singhvi, you yourself has gone through Corona. What was your experience both physically and mentally?
Dr. Agarwal, of course, I don't claim to be a doctor in any sense except by a certain title, which, by the way, I believe was given before medical doctor titles were being given. But that is by the way. I almost considered me and my family the first family of COVID, because it's not only my experience, But my wife also had it, my younger son also had it, and my grandson also had it. So the first point I noticed was the different trajectories and the different intensities and degrees which the disease within a family can have. For example, after testing positive on my day one, because that day I did have fever and ache, so I went for a test and I tested positive. Till day 20, when I tested negative, I was completely asymptomatic. You'll be amazed to know that I had not even fever of 98. I had no pain, aches, none of the symptoms. But yes, I was in pain on the first day, which is why I tested. My wife, on the other hand, went through a more severe trajectory. And there were some worrying moments because she had to be administered plasma. And I think if it's done in the middle, this is my non-medical view, I think bang in the middle, just well below serious, but when it's kind of in the middle of the trajectory, I think plasma has worked wonders. My son was between me and my wife, not as good as my case and not as bad as my wife's case. Again, a different trajectory. Symptoms different, pains different, complaints different. And my grandson, happily and touchwood, had zero symptoms. We didn't even discover that he had COVID till a little later. And I'm told by reading up something, I read a Lancet study of 2020, that possibly this is gentler and kinder on kids, this corona COVID. But that was the way, luckily, it was. So the only person who escaped it was my daughter-in-law. Just to complete in half a minute, one, I personally and our family benefited from FabiFlu. Two, the old well-known Dexa worked for us. And I think in my wife's case, it was plasma. No other case required it. I learned small little nuggets, I don't know right or wrong, I'm speaking as a layman, from doctors that what is considered commonly useful steam should not be taken after you test positive. Because I was told something commonsensical that it would spread well deeper and within your lungs if you took after testing positive. It is all right if you don't know or if you don't have it. And the last two things I want to tell your viewers is that I think you need to be always aligned with a good home service hospital or medical service. I mean, going to a hospital is one thing, but find in advance a place which can sync you with their home service. And I want to publicly proclaim that I found the Max Smart home service and their hospital service, because both my wife and my son were in ICU also briefly, not so much for the illness, but for better care. We found all their services, home and hospital, very useful, very efficient, very disciplined, and a team of 4 or 5 different doctors dealing with different aspects. I want to compliment that, and I'm sure that's true in other services also. Of course, whenever I say this, I put the caveat that we are all privileged people, and I develop an attitude of gratitude because there's a large number of people in this country who can't afford these services, and I always do think of them. And it is sad, but I think to the extent that you can provide home services in a small measure to such less fortunate people, it would be a great achievement.
What about did you have if any time fear, stress, that uncertainty?
To be quite honest, Dr. Agarwal, because I'm of course weak even after the disease, but otherwise, since I had no symptom, my fear was virtually negligible. I just treated it like some kind of a flu, and there was weakness. But as my wife's illness grew, I think we got an element of fear. We kept hearing some horror stories, and but the doctors were very efficient, and I think they uh, heard our complaints. My wife especially was at some bad nights and bad days, but they stuck to a certain protocol. FabiFlu to a certain stage. Only when the things read, you have those. I mean, you guys are doctors, so I don't need to tell Dr. Joshi others. The ILA-6 or the D dimer and those things, those parameters. On the test basis, they then switched to plasma. And I think it's important to find the right people and then have faith in your doctors. And I think that's how the fear stabilized. But there was a middle period when there was, yes, a fear and misgiving, more for my wife and partly for my son than for myself.
So, Shashank, you have heard many success stories of doctors getting intensive care in Mumbai. And all our earlier panelists yesterday and day before, they all had suffered from corona. And many celebrities have got a moderate to severe corona. But for a time has come today on this date, India is not like Iran or Italy or New York to say we don't know what to do. We should be able to manage all cases if they come in time. Shashank.
So I think thank you very much for having me. And at the onset, I would like to compliment and congratulate Dr. Singhvi for conquering the disease with so much of positivity and also sharing with others, because I think we can, these type of role models are very necessary across the country because so much of fear and phobia strikes in. And I think as a whole, as a nation, I think we have tried our level best to mitigate the disease and have some pattern which has been established. And I think public and private sector, and particularly the private sector, has done its yeoman's best. But I think the medical profession in general have tried to put a protocol in place. And I think now after 4 months, I think tomorrow it will be 4 months, we at least know, as Dr. Singhvi said, we have antiviral drugs, we have immunological agents, we have plasma, we have steroids, and more or less we know who needs what. But there are two things about this virus. One is this virus is predictably unpredictable. And you saw in one family just now, which Dr. Singhvi very eloquently described, that this virus has different manifestations in different people based on their immune system. And I think as Indians, we are blessed because we have a very robust innate immune system. And we saw that the senior person and the child had a robust immune system, but some people in their own family crumbled, and we don't know why they crumbled and who is the one who will crumble. But it is the right time, the right place, the right doctor that is making all the difference. But I think one has to be prompt, and I think we need to see that we have a uniform protocol across the country so that everybody is able to benefit it. And I think we are getting there. We were a slow starter, but I think now we have caught up as far as the medical treatment goes. So the treat and care, I think now looks to be better in place, and plasma definitely has a role to play. So has dexamethasone or steroids. So have the antivirals. So at least we are blessed and fortunate than many other countries, including United States. Also, we have a very rapid turnover time of test. If you go to the US, sometimes it takes 5 days to get a test report. In places like Mumbai and Delhi, we can have a turnaround test for RT-PCR within 12 to 24 hours, an antigen test within 1 hour. So I think we are little blessed compared to rest of the world. In fact, I think India is the only country which is doing antigen test, and which itself, we should be proud of something which we are doing.
So Abhishek ji, we have now learned, me and Shashank has been working on Delhi and Bombay manifestations. We have seen is that day 5 is the most important. So day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, for these 4 days, if you check your 6-minute walk test SpO2 level, and if they start falling, you know that you need immediate care. If you have a loss of smell and taste, it's okay. If you have GI symptoms, it's okay. Only those patients, if they know really what day 1 is, and day 3, 4, 5, 6, they just walk for 6 minutes and check their oxygen levels. If their oxygen level falls, they need immediate treatment. If we do that, we can literally say mortality is an exception and not the rule. Recovery should be the rule and not an exception. If a patient reaches us in time, we know how to take care of the patient. If the patient comes late, there we will lose some of them, not all of them. Some of them we will lose because they have missed the window period. So being a spokesman of an important national political party, I want this to come from people like you, that all the important people in the society should come forward and make sure that the fear in the mind of people is taken out. People have started thinking COVID means death, diabetes means death, elderly means death. That has to be taken out. That if we detect exertional hypoxia on day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, we should be able to save 100% of the people. When I say 100%, it cannot happen. But medically, we say yes, we should be able to save a person.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Agarwal. Number one is promptitude. And I think because I went on the first day, and remember, I was a case who did not have a symptom even on the second day. So I could have avoided it in some weird sense. But luckily, having gone on the first day, my treatment having started early, That also meant that my wife got it about 4 or 5 days later. We were equally prompt. So promptitude is number one, there is no doubt. Secondly, I think you have to simply talk amongst yourselves, the family and doctor, to realize that there is no question of that fatal fear. I used to think that it's called comorbidity, means age plus one of the comorbidities. The doctor said it's or, not and. So technically, though I'm well under 65, I have mild diabetes. Maybe not so mild because on your H1ABC index, I have 6.7. In the old days, it was considered high. Nowadays, it's considered okay. But therefore, with comorbidity, I had absolutely no fear because I knew I had started early and things worked. But I think discipline is required in this. Of course, I think the most important is that the only thing certain about COVID is its uncertainty. What he said, the only predictable thing is its unpredictability. I'll tell you why. In my case, I kept fearing till day 7 that the second week will catch me and cripple me. Because a very, very senior politician, a former minister, I'll not name him, he himself was perfectly fine for 7 days. And then it hit him in the solar plexus from day 8. His mother, who also fell seriously ill, was fine till the 9th day, astonishingly. And then it hit her badly. So this is a very strange, weird disease as far as its predictability is concerned. I was all right till 7th day, and I kept saying between 7th and 14th day, I may have a new problem. My wife, I think, had a worse period from about 5th or 6th day for the next 3-4 days. But, it was it wasn't a spike and a fall. And my son also. So I think you need to be prepared for this, and you need to start the right thing at the right time. Under medication is also a problem in our society. We fear going to hospitals and doctors, but equally, lack of trust in doctors. There was a time when because of my wife, some of our family members were questioning the doctors, and then we realized that we just have to follow the protocol. I think that's important.
And that's what I'm saying, Abhishek ji, is that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th day, if you miss your exertional hypoxia, then your chances of complication in the second week are very high. I'm 100% sure that if you do not miss exertional hypoxia on day 3, 4, 5, and 6, because that exertional hypoxia is asymptomatic. Only if you exert, you will be able to detect that you have hypoxia. And if you don't exert, if you are resting, that hypoxia will precipitate. Suppose this was on day 6 hypoxia, they will present the case on 9th day or 10th day as a complication with that. So exertional hypoxia, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. If done properly, you can pick up. And at that moment, if you start blood thinners, you may prevent complications after 7 days. That's what me and Shashank both have agreed on many platforms, that day 3, 4, 5, and 6 are very important. But you said about the age. I want to slightly differ here, and I want your opinion. Yesterday, Maharashtra government said people who are 65 plus, they cannot appear in TV, they cannot appear in commercials, they cannot go for shooting. How can you do that? What law tells the government to say that people more than 65 years of age cannot appear in a commercial or a TV show? I'm not been able to understand. Medically, we don't differentiate into age. Chronological and biological age are different. At the age of 90, you may behave like 60. At the age of 50, you may behave like 90. How can you have this type of law?
Well, frankly, I, in fact, was not aware of it because I was busy. But if there is a law which is a kind of a ban, and that too a ban on your professionalism or your vocation or your particular talent, then I think if challenged legally now, I'm saying it would clearly be of very doubtful validity and likely to be struck down. Because this is a blanket rule, irrespective of a particular state of health, irrespective of your particular infectability, and irrespective of any degree of comorbidity. You just put a ban merely by age. I think that's irrational. I think that's arbitrary. I also think it doesn't achieve much except, in fact, a fear phobia of unnecessary kind. It creates, after all, the large population out there, both above 60 and 65, it creates a phobia for no reason. So these are kind of blanket approaches. So I think while there must be a uniform policy, which is the theme of your session today, the uniform policy itself, there must be uniform. But within the uniform policy itself, there have to be components which say this is the policy to be followed So category 1 in a containment area, category 2 in a particular category of affected people. So the policy must be uniform across the various categories which it addresses, but it must micro divide itself into categories also. And this kind of a blanket approach reflects really an easy way out, a kind of a unthinking way of just having a blanket ban and hoping the things will work themselves out.
So, Dr. Shashank, do you feel that when I was as a president of Confederation of Medical Association of Asia and Oceania, and I was interacting with all my fellow 19 countries, and then I spoke to South Korea, who was able to manage their show very well and very quickly. There was a time when they were almost like rising, rising, and rising. And they said the only thing they did was that within 15 days, in every hospital in the country, they mandated airborne isolation infection rooms as a part of the triage. That no patient will go out of the emergency room without knowing their RT-PCR report, which was made available in 2 hours. And based on AII room, based on the report, they will be trashed to either a COVID center or a non-COVID center. In India today, even if today when we are talking about TB eradication, and we know AII rooms are a must for TB eradication, maybe 90% of the hospitals do not have that facility.
You are absolutely right, Dr. Agrawal, because AII is a mandatory thing in airborne or droplet-borne infections. And I think Korea did two things very promptly. One was aggressive testing, including mobile kiosks in every corner of the place. And second is they had this air ventilation isolation, biosafety measures which were in place. And I think it is imperative that across India, in all healthcare setups, we need to have an AII policy in place so that the healthcare workers as well as the people who are coming there for care, both of them are protected from cross transmission. And these are transmission areas which are focus points where the transmission chain can be broken. And when it can be broken, when we know that there is science behind it, it should be done. And I think this should be universally followed. I think there might be some expense involved in it, but more than expense, it is education, understanding, and ensuring that prompt action is taken. I think what has happened here, again in COVID, is there has been a lot of flip-flop. We started with no mask to strict mask. We started that it is not airborne to a potential airborne condition. We started with closed ventilated rooms versus open air spaces. So that is why this whole last 4 months, we have learned so much in the pandemic that it is time that we have some aggressive policies in place so that we can mitigate the problem and kickstart and unlock in a very mindful way. See, even though the locking might have been challenged, it is a science. The unlocking is an art, and it needs both people's will and the political will. And we need both these wills to go hand in hand. And that is something which we need to synchronize. Also, health is complex because it is center and state both. So again, we need synchrony. So I think synchrony, uniformity is the order of the day. And I totally buy your point that.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, AII should be mandated in all healthcare setups. I totally agree with that. And also we need aggressive testing, tracing, and isolation, that is also the order of the day.
Abhishek, what we are talking about is that there is a contact time. That if I am positive, if I have a meeting with you, and if my meeting with you is less than 10 minutes, then your chances of getting infected are very low. That is called as a minimum contact time. Normally, we say half an hour of period is required for a virus to reach my body. So I am not going to get infected by a casual infection. But in an emergency room in a hospital, if there are multiple people who are positive, half of them are negative, because their stay is going to be more than 10 minutes, they are likely to transmit it to others. Therefore, AII room only means is a negative pressure room. In that room, air exchanges takes place every 10 minutes. So therefore, the air doesn't remain the same in 10 minutes time. So therefore, you cannot cross-infect. Now, this is different from a OT, which is mandatorily a positive pressure. But in an AII room, you are mandatorily a negative pressure. Unfortunately, and that is a must. You cannot eradicate TB from our country because that's a droplet nuclei infection. That's a real airborne infection, and therefore somebody needs a political will, scientific will to mandate
Well,
directly or indirectly. Yes,
I wish more people had spoken about this, because I don't think even today, as we speak, after 4 to 5 months of direct coronas and lockdowns, there is much awareness of these negative pressure rooms at all. Forget the rural areas, forget the urban areas. In good urban areas also, I think the number of these kind of facilities would be highly deficient. So I think this is something which, and of course, I now make it a point to not see too many Corona programs because there's an overload of information. But
absolutely.
amidst the overload of information, which is there in print, visual, all medias, amidst the overload, there is very little talk of what you just mentioned. And I think this is a physical infrastructure which is not too difficult to create, and it should be created. And I think this would be something which should be emphasized by a medical and non-medical person alike. I have two other quick points, 2 or 3 points. Two are semi-medical and one is non-medical. One is that for the life of me, I cannot yet guess this source and contact point you mentioned. In a theoretical sense, I and my family should be the least likely to be infected, because for 5 months, at least my wife and I have not gone to a single get-together, have not invited anybody except one friend who is perfectly all right and from whom we did not get it twice in 5 months. We have not gone anywhere even for parties of 3 people or 3 couples. I can only ascribe it to 1 or 2 chance staff or something who has clear, but I can't pinpoint it even today. That's point one. The second is the larger issue of which is now, of course, of paramount importance to me, as to this debate, and perhaps either of you could throw light on this. This debate is uncertain and ambiguous as to how many months does this precious supposed immunity which I and my wife and my son have got last. People say 3 months, then say 4 months, then say 6 months. And within that time also people say that it depends on how many antibodies you can do. So within the 3 months you might be suspect. So we are a little concerned about not getting a clear answer on this. That's point two. Point three is, of course, beyond medicine. My general point about psychology of the COVID whole issue itself, because I believe COVID has lots and lots of lessons for us to absorb as a society. I'm not sure we are absorbing it or will remember it. It's an attitude of gratitude which we must have, and minimalism. I mean, I have learned minimalism so effectively that I realized that one room with some music, books, television, and good Wi-Fi connectivity, and you can virtually spend your life in 5 or 6 or 10 sets of clothes. And this minimalism, this interesting book which one read, The Power of 30, which said you must reduce everything you can think of to 30. It's actually possible, but I'm sure that by the time we come back to our bad old days, we will forget this lesson. So I think, and the last point, I know I've taken too much time, but just half a minute. With very good intentions, the government does sometimes create harassment for COVID patients. And I must tell you, it's almost laughable. We used to receive almost 7 calls a day from diverse government agencies asking the same thing. Sometimes on the same agency, a different person. Do you have COVID? How are you? Are you being attended to? So it was good in the first 1 or 2 days, but it went on even when my wife was in the ICU. I ultimately had to intervene and said all calls must come to my number only. And then I told them to stop this. We had, of course, a notice put out right in the beginning, but yet the calls continued for almost 10 days. So that sometimes the concern can become a harassment.
So we will discuss your couple of points. Let's have a short break, and after the break, we will try to answer all the questions raised by Abhishek ji. Normally, our program is for 30 minutes, but today we will extend it by 10 minutes. Let's have a short break. So you are watching Med Talks with Dr. K.K. Agarwal, 7 p.m. show every day. And before the break, our Honorable Dr. Abhishek Singhvi said that his whole family suffered from corona, but he does not know the primary source, from where the infection came. And that's what, Abhishek, the definition of community spread is, which government has been denying, that community spread has not taken place. The definition of a community spread is when the person says, oh my God, from where I got it. And that's what one line, one word answer of a community spread is. You will never come to know from where the infection came. Shashank, you want to add on this?
No, absolutely. And can I take the antibody question?
Yes, you take how many months the antibodies may last?
So Dr. Singhvi, this virus is only 8 months old. And on an average, if I use an analogy of other viruses, usually the viral antibodies stay in your body for 3 to 4 seasons. Normally, the season being around 3 months. So we wish and pray that in your family, the antibodies will last you in a neutralizing titer, more than 50%, which is not available in India in many labs, for at least a year. And that is really our wish and pray. Unfortunately, yesterday only a paper got published in the New England Journal of Medicine where they saw in the Los Angeles County a dramatic drop from 50% of neutralizing antibody to 0% in a span of 3 months. So as I said, this virus is predictably unpredictable. But I think whatever little science we know, I think we are little better off. Indians have innate immunity. Our immune quotient is better because our hygiene quotient is poorer. So you see, that is why probably we have robust immunity. Also, as Indians, we have been immunized with BCG, oral polio, and many other vaccines, which our Western, Caucasian, white counterparts have not been given. And that is why probably their immune response is poorer compared to us. So I personally feel it should last you at least 3 to 4 seasons, probably 9 months to a year, and maybe even longer. And let us wish and pray that what I am saying is true, because I am not an astrologer. I am not a predicting scientist, but I am a scientist. And from a science perspective, that is the most logical way I can answer, though I know you can pull me to a court and drag me there. No, but I wish I am proven right. I wish I am proven right, but usually 3 to 4 seasons. That, as I said, is based on analogy of other similar viruses. Dr. Agarwal might have a counterpoint.
Yeah. I want to add is that flu illness also lasts for a year. Even herpes zoster can have a relapse. There can be a secondary attack of this. This virus can also mutate. If 70%, if 30% of the virus mutate, it behaves like a new virus. If you are talking about 2019, you can also have a COVID-20 next year. We don't know how that will behave. Everything is unpredictable. But remember, at this moment, we are only checking humoral antibodies. We are only checking the police. We are not checking the military as a protective phenomena. The military is called cellular immunity, where there is no way to check. And this virus causes basically seriousness because of cellular immunity. Cellular immunity means the cytokine crisis, what we say, which leads to death, means when your own cell starts killing your own body, like what happened to our Madam Prime Minister. She was killed by her own security. That is called cytokine crisis. To prevent that cytokine crisis, we need a cellular immunity where we are not checking. The vaccine, which yesterday Oxford has said that we are checking that our vaccine is producing both humoral and cellular immunity, and that's made a headlines. So we, at the moment, maybe even if your immunity show, even if your antibody titer is not there, doesn't mean you are not immune. I personally, if I want to predict, I would say it will protect everybody from 1 to 3 years. And that's what, because we don't get coronaviruses every year. Other coronaviruses we have not been getting. When I talked to my Singapore counterpart, and they said in 2019, Corona SARS-1, their cellular immunity is protecting them from COVID-19 illness even today.
Very interesting. Yes.
From that point of view, it is even 11 years. So cellular immunity from Singapore experience, they say it may last for 11 years. So we should not talk even about the humoral antibodies, which is like a state police. Cellular antibodies are like the military. If the military is with me, I don't care whether the state police is with me or not. That's how we try to understand with that. It is like a Z security if you have. Why do you bother about the local police? And that cellular immunity is the Z security with us.
Well, let's hope there are more studies published soon and we get a proper idea on this.
So at the moment, we are telling everybody, don't talk about secondary, don't talk about reinfection. But because this virus has caused us a pulmonary illness, there means we are also prone to get other pulmonary illnesses. Therefore, our masking should continue even after recovery. This shouldn't happen that I've got a passport from tomorrow, I'm not going to take precautions. So that precautions of masking and social distancing must continue irrespective whether you have suffered or not, irrespective whether you have developed the antibodies or not. So I want to, we still have 4 minutes with us. So I'll pick up one small issue, and that is that if a vaccine is available in India, and it is 130 crore people who will need a vaccine, to know whether you need a vaccine or not, you need an antibody test, which costs approximately 600 rupees. You will need 2 vaccines, which will be 1,000 rupees each. Yesterday, Niti Aayog has said that we are working on a policy, how it will be distributed to people. What do you feel can happen? Because
look, I think, of course, the day we have a vaccine, whether by the end of this year or whenever, it will be a major milestone of medical history. I mean, I'm talking about a genuine, workable, effective vaccine, not merely rumors or speculation. Number 2, for a country like India, I think at one level, for one segment, there is no alternative but to prioritize it and make quotas for it. There is a section out there which cannot do without quotas. Now, whether certainly your medical COVID warriors, certainly certain other vulnerable sections, certain other essential service sections, certain other people of a particular category which you can define, they must get priority. And I think there must also be within that a income level cutoff. That's 1. 2, look, the practical answer in India is that the well-offs will ultimately get it as and when they need it. Let's be practical. The well-offs will find a way to get it. So I think obviously they may pay more, they may import, they may get, but there's no question of putting quotas for them or prioritizing them. Possibly the best answer would be to make 2 large quotas and then leave it to the free market. That would be the best. One is the first one I said, and the other is the middle category, which comes immediately second. But this has to be done in a very sophisticated, nuanced manner by experts. Not the kind of blanket manner, as you said in Maharashtra, that you go and just have all people above 65 banned. It has to be thought out, statistically thought out. And then over time, of course, I don't think this will last more than a few months, because by that time, the vaccine, if successful, will be produced in such large numbers that it will be a question of, affordability, which will always be there for the larger section. There will be no problem.
So I want to end by asking both of you a final message. But before that, as far as vaccine is concerned, whether it will come or not is a big question as on today. Number 2 is 2019 H1N1 came, and it had a similar problem. At the time, it was also a pandemic. Though it was a localized pandemic, it was within a year, the word pandemic was taken out. But even today, after 11 years, Government of India has not included H1N1 vaccine into its national immunization program. 1. Number 2, even if India includes it as a part of vaccination programs, they will be vaccinating only high-risk people in the government sector, not in the private sector. So this is going to be a big issue, and that's the reason we are debating that who needs it and who doesn't need it. Because H1, if all the vaccinations are not available in the private sector, they are distributed only through a government sector, and everybody cannot go there with that. So I'll ask Shashank to have a final word, and then the final word from Abhishek, and then we close. 1 line final message.
I think the vaccination should be universal. There should be segregation of high risk and moderate risk. But I think there is nobody in India who's at low risk. So I think we are either moderate risk or high risk. So stratification, distribution, maybe over 3 months, 6 months might need this risking, but it has to be done universally. I think we are spending so much on the budget of defense. I think we can easily spend on health. And the government within its, I think every citizen has a right to be vaccinated for a pandemic of this nature. And I'm certain that their wisdom will prevail that they will vaccinate the whole country. I'm very clear about it because I believe in equanimity, and I think in equanimity there should not be any discrimination. And I completely agree with Dr. Singhvi that the poorest of poor are least likely to get an access to it. Vulnerable populations on a priority, maybe the sanitization workers, our corporation workers, the medical professionals or healthcare workers, they need a priority. But after that, it is probably everybody. And I think that is my take on it. And I think with hope, and I loved Dr. Singhvi's Power of 30. I'm going to definitely read it, and minimalism. I think that is something for all us. That is my take. A stay home message for today. So thank you so much, sir. And congratulations again for conquering and giving us your pearls of wisdom, sir.
That's very kind of you. I just want to say, actually, his and my view matches in the vaccine issue also. When I said prioritization and quotas, I meant the most vulnerable and the second most vulnerable in terms of availability and cost. But the same vaccine, if it's a non-controlled cost and available generally, other classes will have access to it. The access should not be denied. It's not that you have to go, it may be more expensive. Secondly, I think once the vaccine takes off, I don't think it will take more than 3 to 6 months to be available to all sections. Price may be a consideration. I think to that extent, we need to, allow certain sections to have it at higher cost. But yes, immunization ultimately cannot be denied to anybody who wants it. And ultimately, that will have to be done. At the end, I would like to say this, that on the whole, today, we have to still exercise discipline without fear, and we have to still exercise caution. People have this danger of getting used to COVID, which I'm finding around me. And getting used to COVID is the most manipulative, deceitful disease, which you have to be careful about, because that discipline must extend even for the next few months. Don't get used to the idea that you can live with COVID in a completely free, non-disciplined manner.
So, dear viewers, I just want to end by saying 1,000 rupees per vaccine is what the industry is saying is going to cost. Minimum 2 injections required, 130 crore people, 2 lakh. This will be approximately, if we have 1,000, when we are talking about 2,72,000 crore rupee plus 600 rupees per person to do the test whether vaccine is needed or not. Will India do it? Will the government do it? Let's watch and wait what the Niti Aayog policy says, where it will be distributed, to whom it will be distributed. Of course, the question remains, the vaccine should be effective and long-term safety has to be there. Long-term safety cannot come unless you watch the vaccine at least for 6 months to 1 year on the volunteers. That's all for today. Let's thank both our panelists, respectable Dr. Abhishek Singhvi and Professor Dr. Shashank Joshi to be here. We'll be back with another show tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Stay tuned.
Namaskar. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ji.
Namaskar. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singhvi. Thank you, Dr. Karwal.
Thank you.